I mean, I haven't been playing well personally from my standard. Got to practice really hard. Got to be really on each other. You know, everybody has to look themselves in the mirror and try to get things fixed.
What's wrong with CJ?
I don't know. You're gonna have lows now, Unc. You know that, right?
Ocho, he hadn't played well this year, Ocho. This is not a low.
Whoa.
CJ Stroud had one of the best rookie seasons of all time last year. He had an entire community memeing the Carolina Panthers for not selecting him #1 overall, broke NFL records, and even managed to carry the Texans into the playoffs with a huge blowout victory. But somehow, following an offseason where the Texans doubled down on CJ Stroud, somehow this year he's having one of the worst seasons in the entire league. So what happened to CJ Stroud? Is it even his fault or his own team? Is he a product of poor circumstances and some unfortunate injuries? But more importantly, will CJ Stroud be able to turn around his season in time for a potential Texans Super Bowl run? Before we get to the content, we are less than 7,000 subscribers away from 1 million subscribers. So if you want to help us make this push to 1 million, make sure you subscribe and turn on our notifications to help the channel grow. And now that we get all that out of the way, work! PrizePicks' new feature has been making us so much money. We've been having a lot of success on PrizePicks, and now they finally launched live squares, meaning that squares will update in real time on the app in the middle of a game. So if you see a player is being locked up on defense, you can take a lower square. Or if a player is on track for a generational game, you can take his higher square in the middle of the game. If you haven't signed up for PrizePicks, make sure you use my promo code microphone to get $50 when you make a $5 play to take advantage of this brand new feature. We've been dominating with our NBA and NFL picks, and I post them for free on my Instagram at @FlightMike and Snapchat FlightMikeSnap. And thank you, PrizePicks, for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? We can't talk about how CJ Stroud fell off without discussing how he was once considered to be a possible top 3 quarterback in the entire NFL. To start off, even though we now know CJ Stroud is the best quarterback in the 2023 NFL draft, that wasn't the consensus opinion at the time. In fact, if you ask most draft analysts, Stroud was the #2 quarterback to Bryce Young, who at the time was considered the hands down #1 prospect in the entire draft.
Top of the draft, there's Bryce Young, CJ Stroud. How did you separate those two?
Bryce Young is just a magician. He can do things that no other quarterback in this class can.
Now, don't let recent history fool you. Bryce Young always was, and eventually would be, the #1 overall pick in the 2023 NFL draft. At least it seemed that way. But that's a conversation for a little bit later in the video, because after the Panthers traded a haul of picks plus DJ Moore to acquire the #1 overall pick from the Bears, they drafted Bryce Young, whereas CJ Stroud fell into the Houston Texans' lap at the #2 overall spot, and the rest was history, or so it had seemed at the time. These two quarterbacks will forever be linked together, just like Robert Griffin III and Andrew Luck, Aaron Rodgers and Alex Smith, Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota. Okay, maybe not that one as much, that was just a huge catastrophe in general. Or more recently, Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. In their rookie seasons, it was very clear who was the better quarterback. Bryce Young struggled putting up one of the worst rookie campaigns of all time. In fact, after the season, analysts were already busting all over Bryce Young. Look.
I shit on Bryce Young for 6 months saying I had him a 2nd round grade, and I had to get a lot of like, what the f do you know? You're an idiot. What did I tell you? I said I didn't think the kid had the body for the league. I don't think it would hold up.
What did you think I was talking about, you freak? But as for CJ Stroud, he was phenomenal. Not only did he put up the best rookie season since Andrew Luck, but he set NFL records. In a game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, CJ Stroud threw for 5 touchdown passes and an NFL rookie record 470 passing yards. The kid seemed absolutely unstoppable in his rookie campaign. Even in the playoffs against the Joe Flacco-led Cleveland Browns, he showed out throwing for 3 touchdowns, 274 passing yards, and completing over 75% of his passes to blow out the Browns 45 35-14. Houston would eventually lose to the Baltimore Ravens in the next round, but CJ Stroud was a Pro Bowler in his rookie year and also won Rookie of the Year. And there was no question about it, he was one of the best young quarterbacks in the entire NFL in just his first season, all while missing just 2 games with a concussion. He even got MVP votes in his rookie season, finishing in 8th place for the award. CJ Stroud was a consensus top 5 quarterback on the planet. But don't just take it from me, take it from the man himself.
Mahomes, Lamar, myself, Dak.
You gotta love that confidence. CJ Stroud said himself that he was a top 5 quarterback in the entire world, but to be honest, he had a pretty good argument. He led the NFL in interception percentage, led the NFL in yards per game, and his 26 total touchdowns in 2023 was only held back by the fact that he missed a few games. So honestly, Stroud was right. He was a top quarterback in the league, at least for the 2023 season. You see, after the 2023 season, the Panthers drafting Bryce Young over CJ Stroud was seen as one of the worst draft day decisions in NFL history. CJ Stroud was flourishing in Houston while Bryce Young was floundering with Carolina. But while that was a fact for the 2023 season, everything would change a short while later. The 2024 season was supposed to be an incredible season for CJ Stroud. The Houston Texans just couldn't miss, whether it was in the NFL draft after completing a crazy haul in 2023 that featured CJ Stroud, Will Anderson, and Tank Dell later on in the draft, and the Texans would arguably have an even better 2024 NFL offseason, at least on paper. The team traded for superstar wide receiver Stephon Diggs, and then also traded for Joe Mixon. They drafted tackle Blake Fisher with their first draft pick in the 2024 NFL draft, and this is what analysts had to say about it at the time.
CJ Stroud, he had one of the most phenomenal seasons we've ever seen by a rookie quarterback. I believe they're legit Super Bowl contenders. How can you stop the Houston Texans? You can't. Now I said why? Because Joe Mixon's the equalizer and they just got too much.
I want to make it absolutely clear. The Houston Texans weren't seen as just a wild card or just a simple division winner. They were seen as an AFC powerhouse, and honestly, rightfully so. If you combine CJ Stroud's rookie season, the fact that the team improved their roster significantly on paper, the fact that they had a budding young star in the form of Will Anderson Jr. and had one of the more promising defenses in the entire league, combined with the fact that they had cash to spend as a result of CJ Stroud and Will Anderson Jr.'s rookie scale contracts, it just seemed like this team was destined to make a deep run in the playoffs. The team improved their offensive line, they got 2 more superstar caliber offensive weapons in Stephon Diggs and Joe Mixon, and also the fact that the young defense had another offseason to improve. This team should have been one of the best teams in the entire league, and to start off the season, they were. From weeks 1 through 6, the Houston Texans looked like the best team in the NFL. They were 5-1, with their only loss being to the Minnesota Vikings, who is a potential number 1 seed currently in the NFC, depending on how their season finale versus the Detroit Lions go. Plus, their superstar quarterback CJ Stroud was elite, just like he was in his rookie year. He picked up right where he left off, throwing 10 touchdowns to just 4 interceptions. He completed nearly 69% of his passes.
Nice.
And had an elite passer rating of 98.6. The Texans were amazing, but then everything would go downhill, and many fans had theories as to why this would happen. The next week against the Green Bay Packers, the Texans lost 22-24, with CJ Stroud completing under 50% of his passes for 86 passing yards, and he was sacked 4 times. This was by far and away the worst game of CJ Stroud's career, but at the time, fans just thought it was an outlier, but this started to look like the new norm. Since that Week 7 loss to the Packers, the Houston Texans would only win 4 more games since. CJ Stroud had just 9 touchdown passes to 7 interceptions. His passer rating is sub 80, and he's completing passes at an under 60% completion percentage. Look at this play in the loss against the mediocre Tennessee Titans. CJ Stroud literally pulls a Dan Orlovsky and runs completely out of the end zone for a safety. I know this is a funny play, but this play is indicative of quarterbacks who are completely unaware of what's going on the football field. I mean, just look at the history of it. Dan Orlovsky did this in a season where the Detroit Lions went 0-16. Jimmy Garoppolo does that against the Denver Broncos, and he gets cut by the 49ers by the end of the season. Am I supposed to believe that everything's going okay for CJ Stroud if he's doing things like this? Of course not. This play is funny, but it also does mean something. But don't just focus on that one play. Let's take a look at these 2 interceptions that he had against the Kansas City Chiefs. On his first interception, CJ Stroud literally just airmails the ball to Jordan Hicks for his first interception of the season. There's no excuse here. It's just a terrible ball. On his second interception, Stroud knows his team is down by 4 points and tries to play hero ball and just short arms this ball right into the arms of Trent McDuffie. These 2 interceptions are terrible, and it just encapsulates CJ Stroud's abysmal sophomore slump. But is it entirely his fault? Sure, CJ Stroud has been mediocre this season, posting numbers that we never would have expected, but is there something else to blame? Honestly, the truth might shock you, because although CJ Stroud does share some blame, he isn't the sole reason for the Texans season not going as expected. I know as NFL fans, it's popular to always blame the quarterback for the team's miscues. Like, is it really Deshaun Watson's fault that the Cleveland Browns are so terrible currently? Is it really Aaron Rodgers' fault that the New York Jets are so terrible currently? Is it Dak Prescott's fault that the Dallas Cowboys haven't won a Super Bowl in almost 3 decades? I know it's tempting to blame CJ Stroud entirely, but the fact of the matter is, it's not completely his fault.
CJ Stroud steps out of the back of the end zone for a safety as the Titans beat the Texans 32-27. CJ Stroud's performance was a mixed bag. He threw multiple touchdown passes for the first time since October 13th in almost over a month, but he also threw multiple interceptions for the second time in 3 weeks and was sacked 4 times. The Texans allowed Will Levis to go 18 of 23, 273, 2 touchdowns, big long touchdowns. In December, Houston faces the Dolphins, the Chiefs, and the Ravens, who all offenses can score in bunches. Kai Fairbarns missed 28-yard field goal attempt in the fourth quarter, marked just the 4th field goal of 29 or fewer yards out of 159 attempts this season. 2 of those 4 misses are by Fairbarns.
Now let me break down what Shannon Sharp just said. The Texans have been struggling, but it's not just Stroud's fault. Sure, he hasn't been playing like his rookie season, but he's been getting sacked a lot. His defense is actually struggling, and his special teams has been mediocre. But let's break that down even further. You remember Blake Fisher, the Texans' first pick in the 2024 NFL Draft? Well, he hasn't started all season until recently. In fact, his first game came against the Miami Dolphins just recently, and his second start was against the Kansas City Chiefs 9 days ago. When you consider that during his second ever start, he was going up against Chris Jones, George Karlaftis, and Steve Spagnuolo, who is one of the best defensive minds in the NFL, he certainly got a lot on his plate. Okay, now that we've established that the offensive line isn't exactly up to par, let's address the defense. On paper, the defense is actually the strong part of the team. Going into week 16, they're top 10 in points allowed, top 5 in yards allowed, but there is one key point: the fact that I completely am omitting the Christmas Day massacre that the Baltimore Ravens laid on them. But that aside, even with this context, they ranked 29th in passing touchdowns allowed. The passing defense is absolutely not where it needs to be in order to stop elite quarterbacks. Plus, Azeez Al-Shaair is out for the rest of the regular season for literally trying to take out Trevor Lawrence. But now for the real reason that the Texans have been held back: their receivers. Okay, it's not like their wide receiver room is bad on paper, because they're not, but they've been dealing with an absurd amount of injuries. First, Stephon Diggs, that shiny new acquisition from the offseason, went down for the season with an ACL tear. Then, star wide receiver Tank Dell suffered what is believed to be a season-ending leg injury against the Kansas City Chiefs. Combine this with the fact that Nico Collins has been week to week ever since a hamstring injury against the Bills, and the Texans have been very depleted at wide receiver. Now listen, I'm not making excuses for CJ Stroud. As we know, any elite quarterback should be able to overcome these types of setbacks and have his team in prime position to win the AFC. Sure, the Texans are 9-6, which isn't bad, but it certainly isn't the top of the AFC like so many analysts have predicted. But let's be serious for a second. CJ Stroud is good, but so far he hasn't been able to make that jump to great. He had a great rookie season with excellent receivers, but now that we're in his second season and those great receivers have been consistently hurt, he's been average to below average. But that's not to hate, because we need to keep in mind that CJ Stroud is a second-year quarterback, and not having consistency in the wide receiver room would be difficult for any quarterback, except Patrick Mahomes. I know he had a phenomenal rookie season, but it's important to keep in mind his supporting cast. We shouldn't have top 3 expectations for CJ Stroud just yet. Not just because it's unrealistic, but also because it's just not fair. Let the kid develop, let him struggle from his mistakes and learn from them. And let's see what we have in CJ Stroud in year 3 and year 4. I think it's important that we already know that CJ Stroud is probably not a bust at this point, so at least that's good. But let's not put the holier than thou expectations on a kid who less than 2 years ago was battling with Rutgers in the Big Big Ten. CJ Stroud is a good quarterback, and who knows, maybe in a year or two he could be one of the best in the NFL. But as of right now, I don't know if that's the case. The Texans need to build a more consistent offensive line around him and definitely work on their pass defense. I don't think the Texans are bad. In fact, I think they have one of the brightest futures in the NFL with young superstars like CJ Stroud, Tank Dell, Derek Stingley, and Will Anderson. But for 2024, I don't think it was fair to put Super Bowl expectations on them, at least for now. Maybe with an improved offensive line next year, CJ Stroud could elevate the Texans to that type of contender. But until then, at least we can tell what CJ Stroud's true skill level is. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think about all this. Do you think CJ Stroud is underrated, overrated? Has he disappointed you this year? What do you think's going on with him apart from his depleted wide receiver room? I like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.